Well, so welcome to the next video for you guys. We're talking about the Chinese River Valley Civilization. Okay, so we've talked about Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, and now we're going to talk about China. So this is kind of the origins of people, the origins of humans. Where do we come from, right? And why is it important? So first thing we need to be able to do is locate China on a map. Okay, so here's China. Make sure you know where that is. Okay, now specifically we're talking about this area called the Yellow River, which we'll get into, also the Yangtze River here. So you need to be able to locate China, and then where is it in relation to the rest of the world. So we have this Huanghe and Yangtze River. Okay, apologies for my pronunciation. It's probably terrible. That's okay. Now, Huanghe River we're going to call the Yellow River. Okay, you might often see it called the Yellow River. You do need to know the Yellow River is the Huanghe River. So this river leaves behind rich deposits of silt called loess. Okay, so loess is a form of silt, which is kind of a form of clay that helps the soil whenever the river floods. And this loess stuff is yellow in color, which is kind of why we call it the Yellow River. So this leads to good farming, this leads to good agriculture, which is why people are able to live in this Chinese River Valley. Now, the river floods, disastrously. So the flooding can be bad. Whole towns, whole cities can be wiped away very easily. The other thing about China's geography is that it is isolated from the rest of the world. So if you take a look at our little map here, what you see is that China, way over here to the east, very far away from the Indus River Valley, very far away from Mesopotamia, very far away from Egypt. So it's difficult to make those journeys, especially over land at this time period. And it's almost impossible during the time period we're talking about to go by sea. So China grows up very isolated from the rest of the world. They develop their own traditions, their own ways of doing things. And of course, China does have natural barriers. They have mountains, the Himalayan mountain range, obviously here. I know I shouldn't be doing this all in the same color, but we're going to deal with it. And of course, invasions will occur, mainly from the north, which we'll get to later in the year, but they're going to build a Great Wall of China there to eventually try and stop those invasions. Not very successful, though. So we need to understand about the geography of China. The Huanghe River, it's isolated from the rest of the world, and we do have some natural barriers to protect from invasion. What did they do to advance society? Well, they built cities mainly built of wood. The upper classes are going to live inside the walls of this city, while the peasants will live outside. So peasants is just kind of a fancy word for your poor people. So we see this divide between the upper classes and the lower classes. So this is one of the big themes in history. A lot of people like to look at history this way. How is the upper class living? How is the lower class living? How do they interact with each other? So in this case, that's how it goes. Upper class is inside the city, lower class is outside. The next thing we need to know, system of writing. So the Chinese had a system of writing, and what they did was they basically drew out their characters. So each character stands for a syllable or a sound, and this way everybody in China can understand what the picture looks like, even if kind of the language systems are slightly different. So everyone can write and understand writing because we can just look at the picture for ox, or we can look at the picture for tree, and we can know what that means. We don't have to know, the intricacies of the language. So the disadvantage of that is that there's just a huge number of pictures, so it's tough to learn sometimes. But this kind of works for them, and it works just fine, and we can understand what it means. It just takes time. Next thing they did, coined money, very important. So this is important for trade. So instead of just trading, for example, 3 pigs for 2 goats, or 2 goats for 5 bushels of corn, now we can introduce money, which leads to business, which leads to banks, which leads to credit, which leads to improvements in the economy. I have a suspicion we'll get more into this later in the year, but coined money, something you probably have in your pocket right now. Maybe not so much if you're Mr. Nolan, but coined money is something that you will find very valuable. Next thing, roads and canals. Okay, these things are going to be built all across China, and these things are going to stimulate, which means promote trade and agriculture. Okay, so we have a system of roads that connects not only inside of China, but also other areas of China. So China was isolated for a large period of time and pretty much throughout their history, but we do have this thing called the Silk Road. Okay, so that might be good to know this now. We'll talk about it more later. Okay, but the Silk Road connects China with other areas of the world, and it allows them to trade and promote what they do with other areas of the world. Now, the last thing we need to know about China, okay, the government and social structure. So this thing, the Mandate of Heaven, very important. Okay, so the Chinese people have what's called an emperor. Okay, he's in charge, and he gets his power from the gods. Okay, so he has divine approval, and that's the basis of his authority. All of his power comes from the gods. Okay, so the gods are giving him the power, and he has the power to run things the way he wants to. And then his family is called the ruling dynasty. Okay, so the emperor's family, known as the dynasty. If his son, or if he died, his son would take over. If his son died, his son's son would take over, so on and so forth. Okay, so this Mandate of Heaven means the gods are approving what he has to do. Now, the social structure for China, very similar to what we've seen before. Okay, so our king or our emperor is at the top, then our priests, then our peasants, then our kind of soldiers. Soldiers a little bit lower on this totem pole than we see in other ones, but very similar to what we've seen before. And of course, slaves at the bottom. And then as far as the family works, as far as the day-to-day social operation works, the family is the important thing here. Okay, it's the center of Chinese society. So your ancestors are linked to your religion. It's important that you respect them. It's important that you believe in your ancestors and kind of pray to them, show them respect, because otherwise you're not doing a good job at your religion. And respecting your parents, something we'll talk about more with Confucianism later on in the year, but again, very important to respect your parents. So just real quick, this thing right here is called the dynastic cycle. Okay, so it has to do with the Mandate of Heaven. Okay, and I know my handwriting extremely bad. I'm trying to do this with the mouse. Okay, I hope you can read that. Dynastic cycle. So here's kind of step one. Okay, a new dynasty is born. Okay, the emperor makes changes, things are going well for a while, and everything's going great. Okay, so everything's working. Okay, the problem is that the government eventually will become corrupted, or there might be a famine hit, or there might be a flood, or there might be something bad happening, and then things are going to go bad, right? Who do people blame when things go bad? They blame the person in charge. Okay, so the emperor is going to lose that Mandate of Heaven if things go bad, and then a new emperor is going to come in and replace them. And then that one's going to start the cycle all over again. So this dynastic cycle, okay, constantly spinning throughout China, and it's something interesting to think about as these kind of empires rise and fall, right?